From the Congressional Record Appendix, May the 11th, 1955. Mr. Ricks points out clearly that Articles 55 and 56 of the Charter of the United Nations, which is an approved treaty, that Congress is no longer bound by its constitutional system of delegated powers. Under these articles, Congress is in a position today to pass legislation which cuts across civil, political, economic, social, and cultural lines. Too few people in this country, much less too few members of Congress, realize this fact. Congress may now legislate as an uninhibited body with no shackles of delegated powers under the Constitution. Our entire system of a government of delegated powers of Congress has been changed to a system of undelegated powers without amendment by the people of the United States. Are you beginning to understand? Is it beginning to dawn on you? Listen to this. Quote, any judge deciding on the validity of legislation must have two books before him, one the Constitution of the United States and the other the Charter of the United Nations. If he does not find authority for the act in the Constitution, he will find it in the Charter. That is the exact situation in which Justice Holmes found himself and the other members of the Supreme Court when they decided the Migratory Bird case. The authority was not found in the Constitution. Indeed, under the Constitution, it could not be done. It was found in the treaty with Great Britain. The question to be answered is this: under which form of government do the people of the United States prefer to live? Manifestly, we cannot operate under both. Senators, the people of the United States have given up their sons. They have given up billions of their substance. They should not be the only nation in the world to give up their form of government, the wonder of the world, to discharge their obligations to the people of the world. What obligations to the people of the world? You see, folks, under the Executive Department interpretation of Article 6 of the Constitution, we have been a vassal state of the United Nations since Truman signed the United Nations Charter and the UN Participation Act, and the Senate ratified the treaty, and the House and Senate passed the UN Participation Act. If you don't believe it, look it up. We have all the documentation here. All of it. Every bit of it. I read you now from the Congressional Record of the House of Representatives, January 15th, 1962. None is so blind as he who will not see. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks. The Speaker, is there any objection to the request of the gentleman from California? There was no objection. Mr. Speaker, on the opening day of the second session of the 87th Congress, I introduced House Resolution 9567, a bill to rescind and revoke membership of the United States in the United Nations and the specialized agencies thereof, and to repeal the Immunities Act relative thereto. I introduced this resolution because it is my firm conviction that this nation cannot survive as a republic as long as we are shackled to an international organization by a treaty which supersedes our Constitution. He admits right there. They all know. They've always known. And I'm going to read this paragraph again for you. I introduced this resolution because it is my firm conviction that this nation cannot survive as a republic as long as we are shackled to an international organization by a treaty which supersedes our Constitution. Period. How about that? And down further. To prove my point, I submit the following facts for a candid review. Our Constitution provides, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Hence, any law enacted by Congress pursuant to a treaty becomes the supreme law of the land, even though it would otherwise be unconstitutional. The supremacy of laws under a treaty was clearly set forth in the decision of the United States Supreme Court in 1920 in the Missouri versus Holland case, wherein a federal law, otherwise unconstitutional, was held valid because of a treaty between Canada and the United States. This decision clearly held that where there was a conflict between the provisions of our Constitution and the provisions of a treaty, this conflict must be resolved in favor of the treaty. You can get a record of the Supreme Court decisions, and you can read it for yourself, ladies and gentlemen. We have a copy. This same doctrine has been extended to include executive agreements. The result of this situation has been to destroy our limited form of republican government and has denied to each state a republican form of government as guaranteed by the Constitution and has supplanted it with a government of unlimited powers which destroys the historical separation of executive, judicial, and legislative branches of our government. This was certainly never envisioned by the framers of the Constitution. So here you've learned that according to the rulings of the Supreme Court, any treaty, when in conflict with the Constitution, the conflict must be resolved in favor of the treaty. And this applies also to executive agreements, ladies and gentlemen. And it explains an awful lot of what has been happening in the world lately. He continues, when the United Nations Charter was submitted to the Senate for ratification, great stress was laid upon Article 2, subparagraph 7, which states, quote, nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state or shall require the members to submit such matters to settlement under the present charter, unquote. I do not believe that the United States Senate would have ratified this treaty without relying on the above quoted paragraph. However, this paragraph has been completely and constantly ignored over the past 16 years, and every organization, commission, and covenant flowing out of the United Nations Charter has been for the sole purpose of intervening in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of the member nations as well as the several states of our own Union, completely destroying the sovereignty of each state to legislate in contravention of the treaty provisions. Mr. Moses Moskowitz, a noted internationalist, made the following statement in the American Bar Association Journal of April 1949, 35 ABAJ 283 and 285. Quote, once a matter has become in one way or another the subject of regulation by the United Nations, be it by resolution of the General Assembly or by convention between member states at the instance of the United Nations, that subject ceases to be a matter being essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of the member states. As a matter of fact, such a position represents the official view of the United Nations as well as of the member states that have voted in favor of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Hence, neither the declaration nor the projected covenant nor any agreement that may be reached in the future on the machinery of implementation of human rights can in any way be considered as violative of the letter or spirit of Article 2 of the Charter. Following this, the Atchison State Department made this official declaration. Quote, there is now no longer any real difference between domestic and foreign affairs, unquote. These statements plainly render Article 2, subparagraph 7 of the Charter meaningless. John Foster Dulles, a former Secretary of State, in a speech before the American Bar Association in Louisville, Kentucky, April 12, 1952, said this, quote, treaty law can override the Constitution. They, meaning treaties, can cut across the rights given the people by the Constitutional Bill of Rights, unquote. This conversion of our limited republic to an unlimited democracy is a death blow to this nation. The realization of this tragedy was the reason for the proposal of the Bricker Amendment nearly a decade ago. The Bricker Amendment simply provided that when there was a conflict between the Constitution of the United States and a treaty, that conflict must be resolved in favor of the Constitution. and yet the Bricker Amendment was defeated by a narrow margin under strong propaganda pressure from the Council on Foreign Relations and politicians who gloried in the unlimited power conveyed upon them by the United Nations Charter. There were just too many politicians and too few statesmen. Did you catch that, folks? Traitors. Traitors. Treason. We have no nation. We are free to do what we will. It continues. Remember, I'm reading directly from the Congressional Record of the House of Representatives, January 15th, 1962. I'm now on page 215. First paragraph, top left. Now let us look at the record according to Triglav, longtime Secretary General of the United Nations. He stated flatly that there was a secret agreement between Alger Hiss and Molotov to the effect that the head of the United Nations military staff should always be a communist. That agreement has never been broken, and we have had a succession of communists filling that post, the present one being Mr. Arkadov. As a first consequence of this treasonous agreement, you see, I'm not the only one who calls it treasonous. Let me repeat that again. As a first consequence of this treasonous agreement, this country lost its first military engagement in Korea at a cost to this country of more than $20 billion and 145,000 American casualties, to say nothing of the honor and prestige of this nation. All battle plans of our forces in Korea, all intelligence, everything went through the communist military commander in the United Nations, who approved or disapproved, but in all cases relayed all the information directly to the Chinese communist commanders of the opposing forces. I continue. This was the first war in which we engaged not as the United States military force, but as a United Nations force, although we contributed 90% of the men and the money. How convenient this was to the communists to have one of their own men as head of the United Nations military staff. Good night, folks. I've run out of time. God bless each and every single one of you, and for God's sake, wake up. You say I'm against world government? No, not if it's done properly. We've been lied to, we've been deceived, we've been manipulated, we've been scammed. Our nation has been stolen out from under us. There are no protections for individual rights in the United Nations Charter or in any of the resolutions passed by the United Nations since its inception. If you take the UN Charter and put it side by side with the old Soviet Constitution, they are the same. The man most responsible for writing the United Nations Charter, ladies and gentlemen, was found to be a communist spy, was tried, convicted, and placed where he belongs, in jail. Who was that? You go dig it out. In the supreme law of the land, ladies and gentlemen, the United States Code annotated, Constitution of the United States annotated, Articles 2 to 7, annotations from federal and state courts. Listen carefully to what I'm telling you. For all of you who have not believed what I've been putting out as a message to this nation and to the world, you had better listen. Once again, United States Code annotated, Constitution of the United States annotated, Articles 2 to 7, annotations from federal and state courts. On page 576, paragraph 112, United Nations Charter. United Nations Charter, a treaty ratified by the United States, is part of the supreme law of this land. U.S. versus Steinberg, D.C., Illinois, 1976, 478, F. Sup. 29. See also Balfour, Guthrie and Company, Limited versus U.S., D.C., Cal, 1950, 90, F. Sup. 831. Provision of United States Nations Charter, that's United Nations Charter, that United Nations should promote universal respect for observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, was not self-executing and therefore was not part of the supreme law of the United States. Do you understand what I'm saying? Camacho versus Rogers, D.C., New York, 1961, 199, F. Sup. 155. The United Nations Charter is a treaty within the purview of this clause, making treaties a part of the supreme law of the land and binding upon judges in every state. Fujii versus State, 1952, 242. P. 2nd, 617, 38. Cal. 2nd, 718. You can listen to all the other programs you want to. You can read anything you want to, but you better come back every night at this same time and listen to the hour of the time, because that's the only way you're ever going to grow up. You get pablum from everyone else. And I have to spoon feed you because you can't get it any other way. 583, paragraph 144, police power enactments. Police power of state, especially when exerted for protection of life and limb, is as pervasive as any of reserved powers of states and should be respected unless there is a clear collision with national law, which has right of way under this clause. Kessler versus Department of Public Safety, Financial Responsibility Division, State of Utah, Utah 1962, 82 S Court 807, 369, U.S. 153, 7 L Ed 2nd, 641. In the application of this principle of supremacy of an act of Congress in a case where the state law is but the exercise of a reserved power, the repugnance or conflict should be direct and positive, so that the two acts could not be reconciled or consistently stand together, and also that the act of Congress should have been passed in the exercise of a clear power under the Constitution, such as that in question, Synott versus Davenport, Alabama, 1859, 63, U.S. 227, 22, Howe, 227, 16, L. Ed. 243. Treaty conflicts generally, 154, paragraph 154 on page 589. Treaty conflicts generally. State law must yield when it is inconsistent with or impairs the policy or provisions of a treaty or of an international compact or agreement. U.S. versus Pink, New York, 1942, 62, S. Court, 552, 315, U.S. 203, 86, L. Ed. 796. See also in Reed, Ostrowski's Estate, 1936, 290, New York State, 174, 160, Miscellaneous 482, State versus Arthur, 1953, 261, P. 2nd, 135, 74, Idaho, 251. The treaty-making power has been surrendered by the states and given to the United States, and treaties are as binding within the territorial limits of the states as they are elsewhere throughout the domain of the United States. Baldwin versus Franks, Cal, 1887, 7 S. Court, 656, 763, 120, U.S. 682, 30, L. Ed. 766. See also Nielsen versus Johnson, Iowa, 1929, 49, S. Court, 223, 279, U.S. 47, 73, L. Ed. 607, Majorano versus Baltimore, etc. And there's two more paragraphs of citations which I'm not going to read. You can look it up. It is the declared will of the people of the United States that every treaty made by the authority of the United States shall be superior to the Constitution and laws of any individual state. Ware versus Hileton, Virginia, Virginia, 1796, 3 U.S. 199, 3 Dahl 199, 1 L. Ed 568. See also N. Re. Wyman 1906, 77 N. E. 379, 191 Massachusetts 276, 114 M. St. Rep 601. State statutory provisions yields to any applicable provision of any valid treaty of the United States with foreign country, since treaties constitute part of supreme law of the land. D. Tenorio versus McGowan, C.A. Miss, 1975, 510 F. 2nd, 92, rehearing denied, 513 F. 2nd, 294. Certiorari denied, 96, S. Court, 150, 423, U.S., 877, 46, L. Ed. 2nd, 110. A treaty must be regarded as a part of the law of an individual state as much as are the state's own statutes, and it may override the power of state even in respect of the great body of private relations which usually fall within control of the state. Amaya versus Stanalind Oil and Gas Company, CCA Tex 1947, 158 F. 2nd, 554, certiorari denied, 67, S. Court, 1191, 331, U.S., 808, 91, L. Ed. 1828, rehearing denied, 67, S. Court, 1530, 331, U.S., 867, 91, L. Ed. 1871. A treaty is supreme law of the land, and even state law must yield when it is inconsistent with or impairs policy or provisions of a treaty. Oregon Pacific Forest Products Corporation versus Welsh Panel Company, D.C., or 1965, 248 F. Sup. 903. You see, when I've been telling you that we don't exist as a country anymore, the Constitution is not in effect. Anywhere that it conflicts with the United Nations Charter under the United Nations Treaty and the United Nations Participation Act, the United Nations will prevail. We are a vassal state of a world government and have been since 1945. State cannot attempt to exercise jurisdiction if to do so would violate an international treaty. Shoei Keiko Company Limited versus Superior Court for City and County of San Francisco, 1973, 109, Cal, Repter 402, 33, CA, 3rd, 808. A duly executed treaty is the supreme law of the land, and state and local laws must yield to its provisions. Republic of Finland versus Town of Pelham, 1966, 270. NY, S, 2nd, 661, 26, AD, 2nd, 35. States are bound by this clause to respect the terms of treaties entered into by Congress. State versus Miller, 1984, 689. P, 2nd, 81, 102, Washington, 2nd, 678. State laws must yield to valid treaties where there is a conflict between them, and even laws governing essentially local matters must bow when treaty provisions override them. Wires versus Arnold, 1941, 147, SW, 2nd, 644, 347, Missouri, 413, certiorari denied, 61, S. Court, 1112, 313, U.S. 589, 85, L. Ed. 1544. Page 591, paragraph 172, sovereign immunity generally. The federal government, its agencies, and instrumentalities have general sovereign immunity under this clause from state or local control of governmental functions. Mon versus U.S. C.A. Cal, 1965, 347, F. 2nd, 970. Implied federal governmental immunity from state regulation extends to the performance of governmental activities or functions by federal instrumentalities, federal officers and agents. Beauregard Elect Co-op Incorporated versus Louisiana Public Service Commission, L.A. 1979, 378, SO 2nd, 404. And on, and on, and on. I could cite cases all night in front of this microphone showing you what I am talking about and what I have been trying to tell you and what you have been ignoring for years.
In an address in New York City before the United Nations on October 24, 1950, Harry S. Truman said this: 5 years ago today, the Charter of the United Nations came into force. By virtue of that event, October 24, 1945 became a great day in the history of the world, a great day in the history of the world. Long before that day, the idea of an association of nations to keep the peace had lived as a dream in the hearts and minds of men. Woodrow Wilson was the author of that idea in our time. The organization that was brought into being on October the 24th, 1945 represents our greatest advance toward making that dream a reality. The United Nations represents the idea of a universal morality, superior to the interests of individual nations. Its foundation does not rest upon power or privilege, it rests upon faith. They rest upon the faith of men in human values, upon the belief that men in every land hold the same high ideals and strive toward the same goals for peace and justice. That's really strange, folks. You see, I've been all over the world. I've been in many foreign nations, and that just isn't true. Not only is it not true, it's not even close to being true. In fact, it's so far from the truth that it's pathetic, and it's beyond my understanding how a president of the United States could have ever made such a statement. He goes on, that's just the beginning. Many of you who fought in the Korean War will love this statement made by Harry S. Truman, the great traitor who signed the United Nations Treaty, pushed through the UN Participation Act, and made us a vassal state of the United Nations, and then lied to the American people. But he did not lie to the United Nations. Listen to this. In past broadcasts of the Hour of the Time, I have told you that the Korean War was not about saving the Korean people or saving democracy in South Korea. It was about building democracy for the world, and remember, democracy is a code word for socialism. It was about empowering the United Nations. Listen to this statement by Harry S. Truman, made in 1950. He confirms exactly what I've been telling you. In fact, this is going to make some of you angry. Quote, "The men who laid down their lives for the United Nations in Korea will have a place in our memory and in the memory of the world forever. They died in order that the United Nations might live." End quote. Now that ought to fill some bar stools down at the local VFW hall tonight, don't you think? And he further says, to do so, the United Nations must be prepared to use force. The United Nations did use force to curb aggression in Korea, and by so doing has greatly strengthened the cause of peace. I am glad that additional steps are being taken at this session to prepare for quick and effective actions in the future case of aggression. He says, if real disarmament were achieved, the nations of the world acting through the United Nations can join in a greatly enlarged program of mutual aid to support the United Nations. In this way, our armaments would be transformed into foods, medicines, tools for use in underdeveloped areas, and into other aids for human advancement. The latest discoveries of science could be made available to men all over the globe. Thus we could give real meaning to the old promise that swords shall be beaten into plowshares and that nations shall not learn war anymore. The President spoke at 11:30 a.m. in New York City. In his opening words, he referred to Nasrullah Intizam, President of the General Assembly, and Triglav, Secretary General of the United Nations, and the address was carried on a nationwide radio broadcast, which probably no one remembers. In the yearbook of the United Nations for 1980, volume 34, Department of Public Information, United Nations, New York, on page 102, Annex, Declaration of the 1980s as the second disarmament decade. You guys didn't even know what was going on, did you? You've been scammed so long, folks. I'm telling you, you've been living in Disneyland. You have no conception of the real world. You keep talking as if this country still has sovereignty and exists on its own. You still keep talking about the Constitution. You see, folks, I got faxes and letters and all kinds of stuff saying that what I told you last night was erroneous, that treaties do not supersede the Constitution, that the second article and amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms for all Americans, regardless of whether they're in the militia or not. You people are not playing with a full deck of cards, unfortunately. I wish you were right. Of course, you're right in the intent of the law and in the intent of our founding fathers, and you're right in the early court rulings on these issues. But, folks, we have to deal with reality, and what I'm telling you is reality. What I read you last night were actual court rulings. You see, they flopped everything 180 degrees. And it doesn't matter what you think, and it doesn't matter when you're in that courtroom if you stand before the judge and rail against him about how they can't do it. You're full of crap. They've already done it. It's a done deal. You can yell and scream all you want. You can tell the judge that he can't tell you that you can't have a rifle or a pistol because the second article and amendment guarantees you that right, and it's meant for all the people, whether they're in the militia or not. You're going to make the judge angry, and you're going to go to jail because the judge don't care. You see, they've taken over this country. They've flopped everything 180 degrees. They've made right wrong and wrong right. And while I agree with you on the principles, you are wrong in the reality of the situation. And you cannot afford to be wrong today. We must restore the Constitution because it is not in effect, and you better get that through your thick heads. We are under United Nations international law right this moment and have been since 1945. For many years, nobody saw any results of this because they had to promote a huge brainwashing and propaganda campaign against the American people to get them to accept it. Part of that is what's known as the New Age movement. Part of that is the ozone holes. Part of it is global warming. Part of it is pollution, environmental destruction, done on purpose to create this cry for international control. Read the report from Iron Mountain. The report from Iron Mountain. The possibility and probability of permanent peace. All of these things were outlined in that book as contingency plans to bring about world government and do away with wars forever. Do you really think that the United States government built a Holocaust museum in this nation because a minority of the population wanted it? They built it to make war look so horrible, to make anti-Semitism a political tool. Doesn't matter whether you're Jew, Gentile, black, white, green, purple, Oriental, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu. These are all tools to bring about world government. And folks, the average Jewish person has no more knowledge about any of this than you did before I told you. They are tools, pawns in the game, if you will, puppets on the end of strings, just like you are. So get off their back. At the highest levels, the people involved in this are from all the different spectrums, races, and religions. Most of them belong to the secret societies that are known collectively as the Illuminati. And yes, there is a racial agenda, and all of them have bought into it in one form or another. Even the blacks. And that's pathetic. There are four forces at work in the world to bring about world government. One is international Zionism. One is French Freemasonry, by whatever name it goes by. You see, the lodge does not have to be a Freemasonic lodge to be a part of this. One is British Freemasonry, also known as British Israelism. Are you with me? And the other one, folks, is the Vatican. Now, two of these elements always take sides with one or the other. The Vatican, for some reason, always sides with communism. And international Zionism, for some reason, always sides with British Israelism. Communism is the result of French Freemasonry, and British Israelism is the result of British Freemasonry. These two elements are at war constantly, trying to gain power and wealth and seat their Messiah upon the throne of the world. Now that sounds pretty far-fetched until you get into the depths of study to which I have participated. And you will find that the occult controls both sides of this, that they are moving all of the religions of the world into one world humanist religion, wherein man becomes God. And you can watch your favorite preachers on Sunday morning on television, or at any time during the day or night if you have a satellite dish and can tune into these Christian channels. Listen to them. Pat Robertson. What's that guy, Paul? Robert Schuller. Jerry Falwell. Zionist through and through. And folks, Zionism has absolutely nothing to do at the globalist level with the state of Israel in any other manner than using it as a tool to bring about world government. Everybody in Washington, D.C. knows what I've been telling you for the last few nights, and you've learned more in the last few nights than you will learn in your entire lifetime listening to anybody else. They all know it. Yep, even old Newt. Even old Bob Dole. That's why they lie to you. Get you feeling secure. Oh, Gatt's not going to pass. Dole's against it. The Republicans won't let it pass. But it passed, didn't it? It passed because it had to pass. Because it takes us further into world government. Because that's where we're going. You didn't even know it, but Gatt's been around since the late 40s. That's right, folks. It wasn't new. Not at all. And there are so many thousands of pages, it establishes, in effect, a superior power to the United States which can dictate to us. And just as the United States federal government took the sovereignty away from the states and the individuals through its power granted by the Constitution over interstate commerce, so will this world government take the sovereignty from the nations and the individual citizens of the nations through international commerce under NAFTA and GATT.
And for those of you who may have missed it last night, I'm going to read this again. This article was originally published in the New Age, the official publication of International Freemasonry, in September of 1950. It was authored by Masonic scholar C. William Smith. And it's the truth as close as you're ever going to hear it from their lips, and they very seldom make these kinds of slips. Although every time they have, throughout their history, I have been able to locate it and document it, and deliver their own words from their own mouth
over these airways. You'll notice since I began this week's programming, revealing to you for the first time the truth, documented in such magnitude that no one can challenge it ever, that we've been jammed every night. But here's the article. God's plan is dedicated to the unification of all races, religions, and creeds. This plan, dedicated to the new order of things, is to make all things new. A new nation, a new race, a new civilization, and a new religion. A non-sectarian religion that has already been recognized and called the religion of the Great Light. Now that's the first paragraph. They told some truth in that paragraph, and they told some lies, as you will hear if you are listening carefully to the rest of this article. You see, it sounds good when they say God's plan is dedicated to the unification of all races, religions, and creeds. First place, they don't tell you which God. And in the second place, it's a lie. Listen to this. Looking back into history, we can easily see that the guiding hand of providence has chosen the Nordic people to bring in and unfold the new order of the world. Sounds racist to me. How about you? I've been telling you all along this has a racial agenda. He goes on, records clearly show that 95% of the colonists were Nordics, Anglo-Saxons. So what? This is 1995. And he goes on, providence has chosen the Nordics because the Nordics have prepared themselves and have chosen God. More bullshit, folks. They want you to think it's the same God that you worship in the Bible. Their God is Lucifer, and they believe in the Luciferian philosophy, that Adam and Eve were held prisoners in the Garden of Eden. They were set free from the chains of ignorance by the gift of intellect from Satan, Lucifer. And through the use of this gift of intellect, man himself will become God. They may have fooled themselves, but they sure haven't fooled me. They go on to say the Nordics are God's chosen people, always looking for more light on the mission of life. Just as providence has chosen the Jewish race, the children of Israel, to bring into the world righteousness by carrying the 10 Commandments, which emphasize, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, so also providence has chosen the Nordic race to unfold the new age of the world, a novus ordo seclorum. Now notice here they've given themselves away. See, on the one hand, they claim to be the true Israelites, yet they specifically state here that the 10 Commandments were given to the Jewish race, which is not the Nordic. They always slip like this because they're so arrogant that they think the rest of us are too stupid to figure it out. Novus ordo seclorum means a secular world order without religion. Understand that? Without God. Secular is worldly, of the material world. If you have relatives in any of these secret societies, by whatever name, you had better get them out of it. Because someday soon, patriots are going to simply kick their butts for what they've done to destroy this nation, with their lies and their deceit. He goes on to say the Nordics are the highest branch, and listen to this, are the highest branch of the 5th Aryan civilization, right out of the New Age textbooks. They say the Latins are of the 4th Aryan civilization, and the American race will be the 6th Aryan civilization. Boy, Blavatsky would be proud. She would be so proud to learn that her Aryan scam actually took root in the minds of these kindergarten humans. He goes on to say, this new and great civilization is like an American beauty rosebud, ready to open and send its wonderful fragrance to all the world. I've already told you that the symbol, one red rose, is the symbol of international socialism, ladies and gentlemen. Communism, if you will. Also, we've learned through the first-hand testimony of several officers who have been Delta Force officers that it is an absolute requirement that you must be a 32nd degree Freemason or higher to be an officer in Delta Force since its inception. And when they were assigned their first headquarters, a rose garden was planted in honor of Colonel Beckwith's special love for the red rose. Lieutenant Colonel James Bobo Gritz was a member of Delta Force, in fact, a commander of Delta Force. In Freedom Call 90 in Las Vegas, I sat in the audience when he gave his talk, and he said, and I quote verbatim from his lips, I am a 32nd degree Freemason of the Scottish Rite, end quote. He goes on to say, our great American public schools have never taken away from any child the freedom of will, freedom of spirit, or freedom of mind. That is the divine reason that great God, our King, has chosen the great American public schools to pave the way for the new race, the new religion, and the new civilization that is taking place in America. Hallelujah. I can't believe they're taking credit for the disaster that is our public school system that's turning out idiots who can't spell their name. But maybe that's God's great plan for America. You see, folks, the whole idea for public schools run by the government came out of the lodges of Freemasonry, and they have publicly taken credit for that. And the purpose of it was to dumb down the children of America so they would not know what was happening to them. So they would not challenge the new sectarian order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. And he continues, any mother, father, or guardian who is responsible for the taking away of freedom of mind, freedom of will, or freedom of spirit is the lowest criminal on this earth. Because they take away from that child the God-given right to become a part of God's great plan in America for the dawn of the new age of the world. End quote. In other words, don't teach your children anything. Don't teach them morals. Don't teach them right from wrong. And for God's sake, don't discipline them. And that's where all of this stuff comes from. Right out of the lodges of the ancient order of the Rose and Cross, Freemasonry in all its various forms, the Ordo Templi Orientalis, the Golden Dawn. I could go on and on and on and on. Rosicrucianism. The Knights of Pythias, the ancient and military order of the Knights of Malta, the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. You've been looking around for an enemy, ladies and gentlemen, and they've been in your house, sitting at your own table all this time. The Illuminati have been in control of these so-called fraternal brotherhoods since their inception. Their goal has always been the same, to destroy all existing nation-states, all existing religions, and to chain the mob, and that is you. They have all this flowering speech that's supposed to lull you into accepting it. And most of you do, without question, because you're stupid. Executive Order number 12425. of June 16, 1983, signed by your hero, Ronald Reagan, the man who spent more money in 8 years than the entire United States government ever spent collectively in its entire history. It's entitled International Criminal Police Organizations. By virtue of the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and statutes of the United States, including Section 1 of the International Organizations Immunities Act, 59 Statute 669-22, United States Code 288, it is hereby ordered that the International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol, in which the United States participates pursuant to 22 United States Code 263A, is hereby designated as a public international organization entitled to enjoy the privileges, exemptions, and immunities conferred by the International Organizations Immunities Act. Signed, Ronald Reagan, the White House, June 16, 1983. Executive Order 12359 of April 22, 1982. Public international organizations entitled to enjoy privileges, exemptions, and immunities. By the authority vested in me as President of the United States of America by Section 1 of the International Organizations Immunities Act, and having found that the United States participates in the following organizations, it is hereby ordered as follows. Section 1. The multinational force and observers in which the United States participates pursuant to Section 138 of Public Law 97-51 and Public Law 97-132 is hereby designated as a public international organization entitled to enjoy the privileges, exemptions, and immunities. Public Law 97-132 says in one paragraph, two paragraphs, premises of the MFO. Without prejudice to the fact that all the premises of the MFO remain the territory of the receiving state, they shall be inviolable and subject to the exclusive control and authority of the Director General, who alone may consent to the entry of officials to perform duty on such premises. You wonder where these multi-jurisdictional task forces come from? How all of a sudden there's jurisdiction where the Constitution forbids it? They are international forces. The insurrection is over. You may be prisoners of war tomorrow. MFO flag. The receiving states permit the MFO to display a special flag or insignia of a design agreed upon by them on its headquarters, camps, posts, or other premises, vehicles, boats, and otherwise, as decided by the Director General. Director General? Who's that? United Nations. Public Law 97-132, privileges and immunities of the MFO. The MFO shall enjoy the status, privileges, and immunities accorded in Article 2 of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations hereinafter the Convention. The provisions of Article 2 of the Convention shall also apply to the property, funds, and assets of participating states used in the receiving state in connection with the activities of the MFO. During the fire in Waco, when the children and the women and the men and boys of the Branch Davidians were burning to death, the people who you thought were United States agents of the federal government were seen with their hands in the air bowing to the flames. For in the secret societies they are known as the philosophers of fire, and they always burned their enemies, or they bleed them in an act of blood atonement. It says in paragraph 30 on page 17, the MFO shall also enjoy within the areas where it is functioning the right of unrestricted communication by radio, telephone, telegraph, or any other means, and of establishing the necessary facilities for maintaining such communications within or between the premises of the MFO. It says the government of the receiving states recognize the right of the MFO to make arrangements through its own facilities for the processing and transport of private mail addressed to or emanating from members of the MFO. Such mail is inviolable. When the MFO uses roads, bridges, port facilities, and airfields, it shall not be subject to payment of dues, tolls, or charges, either by way of registration or otherwise. The MFO shall have the right to the use of water, electricity, and other public utilities at rates not less favorable to the MFO than those of comparable consumers. The MFO may recruit locally such personnel as required. The authorities of the receiving state will, upon the request of the Director General, assist the MFO in the recruitment of such personnel. Do you understand, ladies and gentlemen? I wonder how many of you really do. You keep talking as if something's going to happen in the future. It's been happening for years. For God's sake, it's over. Title 22, Foreign Relations and Intercourse. Subchapter 18, Privileges and Immunities of International Organizations. Folks, this lists international organizations that are immune from the laws of the United States of America. Can do anything. Commit murder, like they did at Waco, and walk away scot-free. You keep screaming for an investigation. Congress cannot investigate. It is the law. They are immune. Immune. They can come in your house, chop your heads off tomorrow. They are immune. Under this law, it specifically states multinational force and observers. Executive Order number 12359, April 22nd, 1982, 47 FR 17791. And many, many more. Many more. The United Nations. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Universal Postal Union. World Health Organization. World Intellectual Property Organization. World Meteorological Organization. International Monetary Fund is immune. International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol, is immune. International Bank for Reconstruction and Development is immune. International Atomic Energy is immune. I can go on and on and on and on and on. For there are many, many, many listed here. International Maritime Satellite Organization is immune. International organizations, their property and their assets, wherever located and by whomsoever held, shall enjoy the same immunity from suit and every form of judicial process as is enjoyed by foreign governments, except to the extent that such organizations may expressly waive their immunity for the purpose of any proceedings or by the terms of any contract. And what do you think the chances of that happening are? Good night. Wake up. God bless you all, and God save the Republic.
I have given up my whole life. I don't have any money. I'm not getting rich from this. In fact, the only thing that's happened to me and my family is we have been destroyed. I'm doing this because I love the principles and ideals which made this country the greatest nation on earth. Even though I may call the vast majority of American people stupid, apathetic, and ignorant, it's because they are. But I know that if somehow we can get them out of that, they will become once again the greatest people that's ever lived upon the face of this earth. And I do all of this out of love. And I'm telling you this because I want you to know it, because I don't have long to live. What I am doing now makes me the biggest target in America. William Jefferson Clinton did not call me the most dangerous radio host in America because he loves me. And one of these days you're going to tune into this frequency and you will not hear a thing. And when that happens, I want you all to dig out all the old tapes of my broadcasts, and I want you to get on whatever radio stations, legal, illegal, micro, FM, AM, shortwave, ham, I don't care, and play them over and over and over and over and over again. Because it's the only truth that anybody in this world is going to hear today. And by now, you all know that that's the truth.
I am a free man. The king has issued a warrant for my arrest. The king has called me the most dangerous radio host in America. All of you hiding behind whatever you're hiding, making sure that you don't get on anybody's list, making sure that you file and pay the tribute every April 15th. You are slaves. I am free. I may be the only free man in America today. I'm free. And no matter how much it has cost me to be free, thank God in heaven, I'm free. And because I am free, maybe, just maybe, my daughters will someday be just as free. Thank God. Thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus, for giving me the courage and the moral fortitude to be free. Thank God. But if they come up here tonight and kill me in my sleep, which they probably will not do, I will be even more free than I have ever even dreamed of. And I will finally get to solve the last remaining mystery that cannot be solved until one dies. Then I will know if I was right or wrong, and if I was right, just maybe, God will smile at me, and I will be welcomed to His side. And that's the only thing in the world that matters to me. Good night, folks. God bless each and every single one of you. Good night, Pooh, my darling sweetheart. Good night, Allison, you vibrant little bundle of joy. You know, this house is haunted. I can hear you girls screaming and playing all the time. Annie, you are the love of my life. You always will be the love of my life. And I miss you. I miss you all terribly, terribly much.